The CEO millionaire didn't know he had sons until they find him in an elite restaurant. Before going into the video, please leave us a like and a subscribe so we have the motivation to make the next videos. Liam Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the San Francisco skyline shimmer in the late afternoon sun. The city stretched before him, a monument to ambition and progress, much like the empire he had built from the ground up. Carter Innovations, the multi-billion-dollar tech firm that bore his name, was a beacon of success, leading the charge in artificial intelligence and automation. At 52, he had everything a man could want: power, prestige, and a life curated to perfection. His sleek Tesla sat in a private garage beneath the building, and his name was whispered in the circles of Silicon Valley's elite with both admiration and envy. Yet as he gazed out at the world he had conquered, a hollow ache settled deep within him, a quiet void he couldn't quite name. The city, for all its brilliance, felt cold. He had given everything to his company: his time, his energy, his heart. Marriage had been a casualty of that sacrifice, his ex-wife and teenage son living a life separate from his own, their interactions reduced to stilted phone calls and infrequent holiday visits. The world saw him as a visionary, a man who had reshaped the future. But in the silence of his penthouse, when the accolades faded and the workday ended, Liam felt the weight of something missing, something vital he had unknowingly left behind. Across the city, in a modest two-bedroom apartment above a struggling bookstore, 25-year-old twins Daniel and Ethan Walker sat by their mother's hospital bed. The air in the room was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the quiet hum of machines monitoring her fragile body. Margaret Walker, once vibrant, strong, and full of life, was now a shadow of the woman they had known, her body worn thin by the relentless grip of cancer. The disease had spread faster than anyone had expected, slipping through their fingers like sand despite every treatment, every hopeful attempt to fight it. Daniel held her hand, his fingers gently curled around hers, as if his touch alone could keep her anchored to them. He had spent his life solving problems, first in school, then in courtrooms, becoming the sharp-witted lawyer their mother had always believed he could be. Yet, no amount of legal prowess or well-constructed arguments could battle the inevitable. His brother Ethan sat on the other side of the bed, his medical training allowing him to read the signs with painful clarity. As a pediatric resident at Bay Area Children's Hospital, he had spent years caring for sick children, comforting families through impossible circumstances. But now, when it was his own mother, the helplessness was unbearable. "Mom," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of unspoken years. "Please, you've been talking about our father more these past few weeks. We're old enough now. Who is he?" The question hung in the air, thick with 25 years of mystery and unspoken truths. Margaret's tired eyes filled with tears as she turned her gaze between her sons, seeing their father in them in ways they never could. The strong jawline, the piercing green eyes that mirrored her own, the same one she had once fallen in love with all those years ago. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the worn leather journal resting on her nightstand, a relic of the past she had kept hidden for so long. "Your father," she whispered, pressing the journal into Daniel's hands, "is Liam Carter." The name hit them like a physical force, stealing the air from the room. Ethan's breath hitched, his mind struggling to bridge the impossible gap between their quiet existence and the man they had unknowingly passed by countless times on the covers of magazines, on the news, on the towering glass building that stood like a giant in the heart of San Francisco. Liam Carter, the tech mogul, the billionaire, the man who had revolutionized artificial intelligence. Their father. Daniel's grip on the journal tightened as he turned the pages, each one revealing a new puzzle piece they had never known was missing. Old photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, articles tracking every milestone of Liam Carter's career. Their mother had kept everything, every scrap of information about the man who had unknowingly shaped their lives from a distance. But why? Ethan's voice cracked, raw with the pain of a son who had spent his life believing his father didn't exist. "Why didn't you ever tell him about us?" Margaret's lips trembled as she exhaled a shaky breath. "I was 22, she began, her voice a fragile whisper of the past. "I was a junior software developer at his first startup. He was brilliant, driven, and married." She let the weight of those words settle before continuing. "When I found out I was pregnant, His company was on the verge of its first major breakthrough. He was working 18-hour days, fighting to keep his dream alive, and trying to hold his marriage together. I couldn't bring myself to be the reason it all collapsed. So you just left, Daniel murmured, the weight of it pressing against his ribs. I took a job across the city, Margaret said softly. Raised you both on my own. I never wanted you to feel like a mistake. You were my greatest gift, but I didn't want you growing up as someone's secret. Ethan swallowed hard, his emotions tangled in a mess of anger, sorrow, and something else. Something more painful than resentment. An emptiness he hadn't even known was there, suddenly illuminated by the truth. He's hosting a charity gala next week, Margaret said, her voice growing weaker as exhaustion pressed against her. At the Augustine, I've kept every article, every piece of information about him, hoping that someday you'd understand. She reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing it weakly. Maybe it's time he knew the truth too. Silence fell between them, but the weight of her words wrapped around them like a vice. Outside, the city bustled on, unaware of the two young men sitting in a small hospital room, their world shifting beneath their feet. The man they had unknowingly walked past on the street, whose skyscraper they had seen 1,000 times, was no longer just a distant name. He was their father, and he had no idea they existed. As night fell over San Francisco, the city lights flickered like distant stars. Somewhere in a glass tower high above the streets, Liam Carter stood alone, staring out at the skyline, oblivious to the fact that just miles away, two sons he never knew he had were about to change everything. The air inside the dimly lit hospital room felt thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the moment that would fracture the fragile reality the Walker brothers had always known. Outside, San Francisco pulsed with life, cars rushing past, neon signs flickering in the cold night air. But inside this room, time had slowed to a suffocating stillness. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the silence as Margaret Walker, her body frail and tired from the war raging within her, reached for the worn leather journal that had rested on her nightstand for over 2 decades. Daniel and Ethan sat on either side of their mother's hospital bed, their fingers gripping her hands, anchoring her as though their touch alone could keep her here, keep her from slipping further away. It had been weeks since they'd first received the devastating news that her condition was worsening. But tonight, it wasn't just the looming shadow of death that pressed against their chests. It was the weight of a truth that had been waiting, buried beneath years of sacrifice and secrecy. Margaret's hands trembled as she clutched the journal, her eyes flitting between her sons, studying them, memorizing them. The same strong jaw, the same piercing green eyes, the same fire that had once belonged to a man she had loved, a man who had never known they existed. You deserve to know the truth, she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Daniel leaned in, his lawyer's mind already assembling the pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even realized was missing. Ethan, the ever-rational doctor, watched her closely, his medical training telling him that this was more than just exhaustion. This was the weight of 25 years pressing down all at once. Mom, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Just tell us. Margaret swallowed hard, and for a moment, it looked as though the words might never come. Then with a shaky breath, she whispered the name that shattered everything they thought they knew. Your father is Liam Carter. The world tilted. For a second, neither brother spoke, neither could. The name wasn't just a name, it was a monument, a legacy, a shadow that stretched across the skyline of San Francisco. Liam Carter, the billionaire, the tech genius, the untouchable legend, the man whose face was printed in magazines, whose name was spoken with awe in every innovation conference, the same man they had unknowingly passed by 1,000 times, whose glass tower loomed over the city like a king surveying his empire. Their father. Ethan was the first to react, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. No, he muttered, shaking his head. That's impossible. Margaret's lips trembled as she pressed the journal into Daniel's hands. It's the truth, she said, her voice thick with regret. I wanted to tell you, I wanted to so many times, but I couldn't. Daniel opened the journal with hands that barely felt like his own. Inside, the pages were filled with evidence, of a life they had never been a part of. Newspaper clippings, old photographs, articles tracking Liam Carter's meteoric rise to success. Their mother had been watching him from afar, tracking his achievements, his failures, his every milestone. She had never let go. Ethan stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair as his mind struggled to grasp the reality unraveling in front of him. You're telling us that the man who's been on the cover of every tech magazine for the last 20 years is our father? That all this time, while we were clipping coupons and living paycheck to paycheck, he was sitting in his penthouse, completely unaware. We even exist. His voice cracked, and the raw emotion behind it sent a pang through Margaret's heart. I was 22, she said, her voice thick with memories and pain, working as a junior software developer at his first startup. He was brilliant, driven, and married. She let the weight of those words settle before continuing. When I found out I was pregnant, his company was on the verge of its first major breakthrough. He was working 18-hour days, fighting to keep his dream alive, and trying to hold his marriage together. I wouldn't be the reason everything he built collapsed. So you just left? Daniel's voice was quiet, controlled, but beneath the surface, a storm raged. Margaret nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I took a job across the city. I changed my name back to Walker, disappeared from that world. I didn't want you growing up in the shadows of scandal or secrets. I wanted you to have your own path. Ethan turned away, pressing his palms against his face. The realization was suffocating. All these years, he had thought they had no father. He had thought they were abandoned, forgotten. But the truth was more complicated than that. Daniel's grip tightened around the journal. He's hosting a charity gala next week, he said, his lawyer's mind already shifting into strategy mode. At the Augustine. His voice was unreadable as he turned to face his mother. Did you know that? Margaret nodded weakly. I've always known where he is, Daniel. I kept every article, hoping that one day you'd understand. That maybe one day he'd have the chance to know you too. The words sat between them, heavy and unresolved. 1 week. In 1 week, Liam Carter, the father who never knew they existed, would be standing on a stage speaking to a room full of people about innovation, opportunity, and second chances. He had no idea that two of his greatest accomplishments weren't AI breakthroughs or billion-dollar deals. They were standing right here. Ethan turned back to face them, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing uneven. We can't just show up to some high society event and demand answers. Daniel met his brother's gaze, a silent challenge flickering in his green eyes. Why not? The room filled with a charged silence. Margaret, despite her exhaustion, saw it, the shift in her sons, the fire in them, the same fire that once burned in Liam Carter. He deserves to know, Daniel continued, his voice steady now, filled with purpose. And so do we. Margaret exhaled, relief and sorrow mixing together. Then take this, she whispered, gesturing toward the journal. Take everything I've kept. If you're going to face him, then he should know the full truth. Ethan hesitated. Then without a word, he reached out and took the journal. Outside, the city continued its restless hum, unaware of the storm brewing within the hearts of two men who had just learned the truth about who they were. 1 week. 1 week until everything changed. The rain drummed against the apartment window as Daniel Walker sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the old leather journal that had shattered the fragile foundation of his world. He had read every page, every line over and over again, until the words no longer felt like his mother's, but instead like whispers from a past he had never been a part of. The past that should have been his. Across the table, his twin brother Ethan paced restlessly, rubbing the back of his neck, a habit he had since childhood whenever he was deep in thought. The revelations still sat heavy between them. Their father, Liam Carter, billionaire, tech mogul, a man whose success story was the stuff of legend. But to them, he was just a name, a stranger. Daniel's fingers traced the edges of a newspaper clipping tucked into the journal, a photograph of Carter Innovation's gleaming headquarters. How many times had they walked past that building, never knowing the man behind it was their blood? How many nights had their mother sat quietly by the window, staring out at the city, wondering if she had made the right choice by keeping them away? And now she was slipping away. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. She's running out of time, Danny. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't have to. They both knew the truth. Their mother had fought 4 years, pushing through every obstacle, every hardship. She had worked double shifts at the diner when they were kids, saved every penny to send them to school, and spent years shielding them from the truth. All for what? So that the man who unknowingly left them behind could continue living his perfect, curated life. I don't understand, Ethan muttered, slamming his hands against the counter. How can someone like him just not know? He had resources, money. He could have looked for her, he could have looked for us. Daniel's jaw clenched. He didn't know to look. Ethan scoffed. And whose fault is that? Silence. The guilt was there, thick in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Their mother had made a choice. And maybe at the time, she had believed it was the right one. But now, with so little time left, they weren't sure anymore. Daniel inhaled deeply, setting the journal down with quiet finality. He's going to be at the Augustine. Ethan turned, frowning. What? Daniel pushed the journal toward him, flipping to a recent article about an upcoming charity gala at San Francisco's most elite venue. Liam Carter was set to be the keynote speaker. Ethan's fingers gripped the edge of the table as realization set in. That's in 5 days. Daniel nodded. It's our only chance. A tense pause. Ethan stared at the article, then at his brother. We can't just waltz into a billion-dollar gala and demand answers. No, Daniel admitted, but we can find a way in. The next few days were a blur of planning, frustration, and desperation. Neither of them had the luxury of time or the connections to easily infiltrate a world so different from their own. But they had determination. Daniel, ever the strategist, used every legal and corporate contact he had, subtly inquiring about last-minute ticket availabilities. Doors slammed in his face at every turn, and the more rejections he got, the more his frustration boiled over. Ethan, meanwhile, searched for another way in. The hospital had a long-standing partnership with several high-profile donors, including Liam Carter. He pulled up patient records, remembering a child he had treated months ago, one of the Augustine's restaurant manager's sons. A favor, a long shot, but it worked. That evening, Ethan returned to their apartment, breathless, exhausted but victorious. He tossed 2 cream-colored envelopes onto the table. We're in, Daniel exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. How? Ethan smirked, but there was little humor in it. Apparently saving someone's kid's life gets you places. For the first time in days, hope flickered between them. Hope and fear. The night before the gala, they visited their mother at the hospital, the reality of their mission setting in. She was weaker than before, her voice softer, her hands trembling. I don't want you going in there with anger in your hearts, she murmured, looking at her sons with eyes full of love. He's not the villain you have made him out to be. Daniel's throat tightened. He's not innocent either. No, she agreed, but neither am I. Ethan clenched his fists, looking away. Margaret sighed. Just give him the chance I never did. Daniel swallowed hard, nodding. We will. They left the hospital with her words branded into their minds, but even as they made their final preparations, doubt lingered. Would Liam Carter listen? Would he even care? What if, after all this, he simply looked at them like strangers? As they pulled on the tuxedos they could barely afford, adjusting the bow ties in front of the mirror, they no longer saw the struggling, scholarship kids their mother had raised. They saw men standing on the edge of something irreversible. Tomorrow, they would walk into his world. Tomorrow, they would demand the truth. Tomorrow, everything would change. The early morning fog curled around the towering skyscrapers of San Francisco, softening the sharp edges of a city that never truly rested. The streets bustled with life. Executives in crisp suits rushed into corporate buildings. Baristas poured lattes for exhausted commuters, and the relentless hum of car engines underscored the pulse of the metropolis. Unbeknownst to any of them, fate was orchestrating a collision decades in the making. Liam Carter moved through the streets like a man on a mission, his mind preoccupied with his never-ending agenda. His team at Carter Innovations had been pushing for a revolutionary AI expansion into education technology, and tonight's charity gala at the Augustine was meant to showcase his vision. But for some reason, the words of his upcoming speech felt hollow. Normally, his mind was razor-sharp, cutting through distractions with ease. But lately, something was off. A strange unease had crept into his thoughts, a persistent, gnawing sense that he had overlooked something important. He shook it off as he stepped toward Pete's Coffee, a small cafe near his office. He wasn't one for routine coffee runs. His assistant usually handled that, but today he had opted to walk. An impulse, a decision made without logic. And that was when it happened. A collision. A young man, moving just as quickly, stepped out of the cafe, his head buried in his phone. Neither saw the other in time. Their bodies slammed together, a near-perfect reflection of movement, a sudden, inexplicable force of fate. Damn, I'm sorry, the young man muttered, straightening himself as his coffee splashed onto the sidewalk. Liam barely registered the apology. His eyes had locked onto something else entirely. The young man's face. For a fraction of a second, he felt like he was staring at his own reflection from decades ago. The same green eyes, the same sharp jawline, the same furrow in his brow when he was deep in thought. Liam Carter had built a career out of recognizing patterns, connections that others missed. And yet, as he stood frozen on the sidewalk, he had no explanation for why this stranger felt so oddly familiar. Before he could say anything, the young man, Ethan Walker, was already hurrying off, oblivious to the encounter. He was late for a shift at the hospital, his mind consumed with thoughts of his mother. He didn't even realize he had just bumped into his father. Liam, however, remained still, staring after him. A strange weight settled in his chest, an unshakable sense that something just shifted in his carefully controlled world. And fate, relentless and unyielding, was far from done. Hours later, the Augustin stood in breathtaking grandeur, its Art Deco facade glowing in the early evening light. Inside, preparations for the gala were in full swing. Tables were set with crystal glasses, gold-rimmed plates gleamed under the chandeliers, and the hum of final arrangements filled the space. Liam had arrived early. Another impulse, another decision made without reason. He wanted to inspect the venue personally, something he never did. "Mr. Carter," the restaurant manager Thomas greeted him with an air of deference. "Everything is in place for tonight. We just had a couple of young gentlemen inquire about the gala earlier. Lawyers or doctors, I believe." Liam barely acknowledged him, his attention snagging on an object left behind on one of the tables. A journal. Worn, its leather cover softened by time, its pages thick with memories. Something about it made his chest tighten. "Someone must have forgotten it," Thomas remarked, moving to pick it up. But Liam stopped him. He wasn't sure why, but something in his gut told him this was important. His fingers hesitated over the worn edges before he lifted the cover. The first thing he saw was his own name written in careful, delicate script, Liam Carter. His breath hitched, and then he saw her name, Margaret Walker. The air around him seemed to disappear. His pulse thundered in his ears. He turned the pages with trembling hands, his eyes scanning old photographs tucked inside. A younger version of himself smiling beside Margaret, her eyes bright with unspoken words. And then, tucked between the pages, he saw a letter. One written 25 years ago, but never sent. "Dear Liam, by the time you read this, our sons will have already been born." Liam's vision blurred. "Our sons." The words slammed into him like a physical force. His grip tightened on the journal as his entire world cracked down the center. Sons, plural. His mind reeled, stumbling through fragmented memories. Margaret disappearing suddenly, his attempts to find her failing, the vague sense that something had been left unfinished between them. And now, standing in the middle of a glittering ballroom, holding a relic of a past he never knew he lost, he felt the world tilt beneath him. He had sons, and he had never known. Thomas continued speaking, unaware of the seismic shift happening in front of him. "Ah, yes. Those young men who were asking about the gala earlier, they were named Walker, I believe. Daniel and Ethan Walker." Liam's entire body went rigid. The young man from the coffee shop. A memory snapped into place. The fleeting moment that morning, the unmistakable familiarity in those green eyes. He hadn't been imagining it. He had seen his son, and he hadn't even known. His grip on the journal was tight, his breath uneven. Everything in his world, the empire he had built, the billions he had made, the advancements in AI that had revolutionized industries, None of it mattered right now, because somewhere out there, two young men had grown up without him, and suddenly the thought was unbearable. He clenched his jaw, exhaling a slow, controlled breath. This wasn't over. Tonight, at this very gala, those young men, his sons, would be here. And he would finally learn the truth. The Augustine was alive with the hum of San Francisco's most powerful and elite. Beneath golden chandeliers and gilded archways, tuxedo-clad investors clinked glasses filled with aged wine, whispering about tech stocks and billion-dollar deals. Journalists hovered at the edges, cameras ready to capture the grand speeches of the evening. And at the heart of it all, Liam Carter stood at the podium, flipping through the notes for his keynote speech. A speech he suddenly couldn't focus on. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong since that morning when a stranger with green eyes bumped into him on the sidewalk. The same green eyes that now stared back at him from a forgotten journal. A journal filled with a history he had never known existed. His pulse was uneven, his usually confident hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks. He had faced high-stakes investors, courtroom battles, even billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat. But this was different. This was personal. The very air in the room felt charged, like an approaching storm. Across the hall, standing in the shadows near the back of the room, Daniel and Ethan Walker waited. Their rented tuxedos fit perfectly, but inside they felt anything but ready. Their hearts pounded in unison. They had envisioned this moment 1,000 different ways. Would he be furious? Deny everything? Would he even care? Daniel's grip tightened around the old, folded letter tucked inside his jacket. The one their mother had written but never sent. Tonight was their only chance. Liam cleared his throat and stepped forward, his voice powerful but distant, like an echo of himself. "Good evening, everyone." The room stilled, all eyes on him. "Tonight we talk about opportunity, about education, about second chances." A pause, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "What about the second chances I never even knew I needed?" Liam's gaze swept across the room and then his heart stopped. Two young men stood near the back, their faces strikingly familiar. It was them, him, the young doctor from the coffee shop, the lawyer who had asked questions about the gala. His mind reeled, the pieces locking into place like a puzzle he had been blind to for decades. They weren't strangers, they were his sons. Daniel met his gaze with an intensity that felt like a challenge, while Ethan's eyes held something different, something raw, a plea for recognition. Liam's breath hitched, his carefully constructed world shattering. Before he could say a word, a commotion erupted near the entrance, a hospital nurse, frantic, searching the room, her wide eyes locking onto the twins. "Dr. Walker," she called out, her voice cutting through the thick, expectant silence. Ethan turned sharply, his heart leaping into his throat. "It's your mother. You need to come now." The room froze. Liam felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Mother, the weight of the word crashed over him, the name Walker still reverberating in his mind. Margaret. The realization hit with staggering force. Margaret Walker was dying. Daniel didn't hesitate. He was already moving, shoving his way through the stunned crowd. Ethan followed right behind, his doctor's instinct fighting against the sheer terror gripping his chest. But as they passed the podium, Liam stepped down. "Wait," he breathed, his voice barely audible. The twins turned. For the first time in their lives, they were face to face with their father. "Margaret," his voice was hoarse. She's our mother," Daniel said, his jaw tightening. "The woman who raised us. Alone." The words cut deep. Guilt, sharp and brutal, tore through Liam's chest. "I didn't know," he whispered. A lifetime of regret in 3 simple words. Ethan shook his head. "And whose fault is that?" The pain in his son's voice was unbearable. Liam took a breath. "I'm coming with you." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Will you?" A beat of silence. Then, with unshakable certainty, Liam said, "Because I should have been there a long time ago." The moment they reached the hospital, the gravity of reality crashed over them. Margaret's condition had deteriorated. Ethan moved quickly, speaking to the doctors, reading her vitals. But there was only so much he could do. Daniel sat by her side, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort. And Liam Carter stood frozen in the doorway. The woman he had once loved, The woman who had disappeared without a trace lay before him, fragile, pale, yet still somehow filled with quiet strength. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw him, tears welled in her gaze. "You found them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Liam swallowed hard, stepping forward. "I should have found you first," he admitted, his voice breaking. Margaret managed the faintest smile. "You always did take the long road to the truth." A weak chuckle from her, a choked laugh from Ethan. Daniel looked away, blinking back tears. Liam sat beside her, his fingers gently closing over hers. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he whispered. Margaret exhaled softly. "Forgiveness isn't something we earn, Liam. It's something we give." He bowed his head, years of guilt pressing down all at once. "I should have looked for you," he confessed. She squeezed his hand weakly. "I made sure our sons always knew who you were," she murmured. "Even when I was angry, even when I was scared. I wanted them to be proud of where they came from." Liam looked at his sons, pride swelling in his chest despite the ache. A doctor entered. "She's stable for now, but we need to monitor her closely." Ethan nodded, relief flickering in his expression. Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Margaret's gaze drifted between them. "You have each other now," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." Liam tightened his grip on her hand. "I won't waste another second." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet sorrow, the air thick with unspoken words and the weight of time slipping through fragile fingers. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was steady, yet each sound felt like a countdown, a reminder that moments were running out, that life never waited for unresolved goodbyes. Liam Carter had faced countless high-stakes negotiations. He had built an empire, revolutionized industries, made decisions that shaped the future of technology, but none of it had ever prepared him for this moment, for seeing her again, for seeing them, his sons. Daniel and Ethan stood on opposite sides of their mother's bed, their expressions unreadable, their bodies tense like coiled springs, as if bracing for an impact that had been decades in the making. Liam's breath caught in his throat as he took a step inside the dimly lit room. Everything about this moment felt foreign and yet inescapably familiar, as if he had walked into a dream he'd never known he was having. Margaret's frail fingers twitched slightly as she stirred, her eyes slowly fluttering open. And then she saw him, for the first time in 25 years. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Liam," she whispered. His chest tightened painfully at the way she said his name, softly, like an old song she had never forgotten, but one too painful to sing aloud. He swallowed the lump in his throat and stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate, as if afraid that if he moved too fast, the entire moment would shatter. "I—" His voice cracked, his mind racing for words that no longer felt big enough for what he needed to say. "I didn't know." Margaret gave him a weary smile, her eyes filled with something that wasn't anger or regret, but understanding. "I know." Daniel let out a sharp breath and turned away, jaw clenched, fists tightening at his sides. Liam knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror countless times in boardrooms and courtrooms, a man holding back an avalanche of emotion. Ethan, however, didn't look away. He stared at him, really stared, as if trying to find the pieces of himself that he had never known existed. Liam's gaze dropped to Margaret's hands, thin, trembling, yet still somehow strong. The same hands that had once held his. The same hands that had raised two boys into men. Alone, his voice was barely a whisper. "You should have told me." A bittersweet smile touched her lips. "And if I had?" He exhaled sharply, his mind replaying the ghosts of choices he never got to make. He imagined what it would have been like to have known, to have held them when they were babies, to have seen their first steps, to have been their father. "I would have been there," he said, and it felt like a promise made too late. Margaret's tired eyes searched his. "Would you?" The question cut deeper than any accusation could have, because he didn't know. He had been so consumed with building Carter Innovations, with chasing success, with proving himself to the world. Would he have dropped everything for a family he didn't even know existed? The silence was deafening. Ethan shook his head, laughing bitterly. "You really don't get it, do you?" His voice was raw, thick with unsaid pain. She didn't tell you because she knew. She knew you were too busy fighting for your company to fight for us. Ethan, Margaret murmured, her fingers weakly reaching for his hand. No. His voice cracked, his eyes flashing. He doesn't get to walk in here 25 years later and act like this is just some accident he can fix. The weight of those words settled heavily between them. Liam turned toward his son, the son he had never met, the stranger who shared his blood. I know I can't fix this, Liam admitted, his voice hoarse. I know I can't undo what's been done. His throat burned. But I swear to you, if I had known, He stopped himself, shaking his head. I can't change the past, but I can be here now. Daniel scoffed, crossing his arms tightly over his chest as if protecting himself from words that could wound. And what does that mean? You swoop in now thinking you can just claim the title of dad? Liam swallowed the lump in his throat. I don't expect that. His voice softened. I don't expect anything from either of you. He looked at them both, seeing pieces of himself in them, the sharp eyes, the stubborn set of their jaws, the fire that burned in them. His sons. He had lost them before he even knew they existed, and it wrecked him. Margaret exhaled slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. They have your fire, Liam. Her gaze flickered to Ethan, your drive to help others. Then to Daniel, your need for justice. Her eyes shimmered, and they have my heart. Daniel's mouth pressed into a hard line, his hands curling into fists. And yet, you let him live his perfect life while we grew up thinking we had no father at all. Margaret's lips trembled. I thought I was protecting you. Ethan turned away, his shoulders shaking. Maybe we didn't need protecting. A heavy silence fell between them. Then, in a voice so soft it almost broke, Margaret whispered, Liam, tell them what you told me. His throat tightened. What? Margaret blinked, exhausted but determined. Tell them what you told me at the beginning, when you first built Carter Innovations, when you promised me that no matter what happened, no matter how big your company became, her breath hitched. You told me that family would always come first. Liam's breath caught in his throat. He had said that, and he had broken that promise. Daniel stared at him, waiting. Ethan turned back, arms crossed. Liam exhaled slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. I was wrong. His eyes met theirs. I let the company become my whole life. I thought success would fill the empty spaces, but he shook his head. It didn't. A pause. A long, heavy pause. Then Margaret smiled softly, her fingers reaching for Daniel's hand, then Ethan's, then Liam's. And for the first time in 25 years, a broken family was finally whole again. Comment below if you believe in second chances and that this family deserves healing. Like this, if you're rooting for Liam to rebuild the bond he never got to have. Follow for more because this journey isn't over yet. The hospital room was quieter now, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of words left unspoken, of years lost, of memories that had never been made. The beeping monitors no longer felt like a countdown to something inevitable, but rather a reminder that time was still here, fragile, fleeting but present. Liam Carter sat in the chair beside Margaret's bed, his hands resting on his knees, his head bowed. It had been nearly an hour since the initial shock of their confrontation had passed, and yet the weight of it still pressed against his chest like a vice. Across the room, Daniel and Ethan stood stiffly, their arms crossed, their faces unreadable. For the first time in his life, Liam felt like an outsider in his own story. He wasn't used to being powerless. He was the man people respected, the man who called the shots, who had built something from nothing with his own two hands. But here, in this small, sterile room, he wasn't the CEO of Carter Innovations. He was a father who had never been given the chance to be one. And now he didn't know where to begin. Margaret, ever perceptive, shifted slightly in her bed, breaking the silence. Her voice was weak, but steady. You're thinking too much, Liam. He exhaled softly. Maybe I am. Daniel scoffed quietly, shaking his head. That's what guys like you do, right? Think too much, build your strategies, make your moves, always in control. He looked directly at him now, and for the first time, Liam saw the depth of the resentment in his son's eyes. But you weren't in control of this, were you? Liam met his gaze, something unreadable flickering across his features. No, he admitted. I wasn't. Another beat of silence. Ethan sat down in the chair opposite his mother, his fingers tapping against his knee, a nervous habit he wasn't even aware of. You're supposed to be a genius, right? His voice was quiet, measured. Built an empire. Changed the world. He let out a soft, bitter laugh. And yet, you never even knew we existed. The accusation, though calm, cut deeper than any shouting match ever could. Liam's chest tightened, but he refused to deflect. I didn't, he said honestly, but that doesn't mean I don't regret it. Daniel's jaw clenched. Regret, he repeated, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. Do you have any idea how many times we wondered? How many birthdays went by with an empty seat at the table? His voice rose slightly, cracking at the edges. How many times Mom looked at us like we were the best thing that ever happened to her, but we still felt like something was missing? Liam's throat burned. He hadn't been there. He hadn't been there for any of it. And now all he had was the devastating reality of their pain. Pain he had unknowingly caused. Margaret reached out, her frail fingers wrapping around Daniel's wrist, grounding him before his emotions could take over completely. Daniel, she murmured. He's here now. Daniel exhaled sharply, turning away. The anger hadn't left, but the exhaustion had settled in too. Liam swallowed hard. I can't change the past. He looked between them. His sons. But if you'll let me, I want to be here now. Ethan lifted an eyebrow, skeptical. And what does that mean exactly? Liam hesitated for only a moment before answering. It means that I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect you to accept me overnight or to forgive me for not knowing sooner. But I do know this. I'm not going to walk away. Not again. Something in his voice made Ethan pause. Daniel, too, despite his anger, seemed to register the raw honesty in his words. Margaret gave a tired but knowing smile. You see it, don't you? She murmured, looking at Liam. He furrowed his brows. See what? She turned her gaze toward her sons, her voice barely above a whisper. Yourself. Liam's breath caught, because now that he was looking, really looking, he saw it. The same sharp intellect that had pushed him to the top of the tech world was staring back at him in Daniel, a man who had fought his way into law and demanded justice in a world that often refused to give it. The same relentless drive that had fueled him through sleepless nights and impossible deadlines was reflected in Ethan, a doctor who had spent his life fighting for others, just as stubborn and passionate as his father had once been. And their mother? Margaret had raised them exactly how he would have wanted to raise his children, if he had known them. Liam's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, something old. A photograph. The edges were worn, the ink slightly faded. It was a picture of him and Margaret, taken years ago, before everything fell apart. Margaret let out a soft, surprised laugh. You kept that? Liam nodded. All these years. His voice was quieter now, thick with emotion. I never knew why I couldn't throw it away. But maybe I was always waiting for something. Someone. The room was silent again, but this time it was different. The weight of anger had not lifted entirely, but something else had begun to settle in its place. Possibility. Liam turned back to his sons. I won't ask for forgiveness, he said. That's not something I can demand. But if you give me the chance, I want to know you. Both of you. Ethan studied him carefully. Daniel's jaw remained tight, his eyes flickering between his mother and the man who had unknowingly shaped his entire life from a distance. Margaret smiled, tired but hopeful. You always said you believed in second chances, Liam. He nodded slowly, looking at the two young men before him. I still do. And for the first time in 25 years, the Carter family had a chance to begin again. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting long streaks of golden light across the room. For the first time in days, the air felt lighter. The tension that had been thick as a storm cloud the night before had not fully lifted, but it had begun to shift, making space for something else. Possibility. Hope. A fragile beginning. Margaret was asleep, her breathing slow but steady, her body finally resting after days of emotional and physical exhaustion. Her sons, Daniel and Ethan, sat near the window, flipping through pages of documents and sketches spread across the small hospital tray table. Across from them, Liam Carter, billionaire, innovator, and the father they had never known, leaned forward, his brows furrowed in concentration as he studied the blueprints in front of him. "So let me get this straight," Liam said, his voice measured, but carrying a hint of something different: admiration. "You're proposing an AI-driven education model that adapts to each student's learning style, eliminating barriers for children in low-income communities?" Daniel nodded, his lawyer's precision evident in his response. "Yes, the system, which we've called Bennett Bridge, is built with an algorithm that adjusts based on the user's cognitive strengths and weaknesses. It's not just a static tutoring program. It evolves." Ethan jumped in, his excitement barely restrained. "It's also medically aware. Some kids struggle because of undiagnosed learning disabilities, ADHD or dyslexia. The software recognizes signs and suggests interventions. Real solutions, not just standardized tests that label kids as slow or behind." Liam exhaled slowly, running a hand through his graying hair. The idea was brilliant. More than that, it was necessary. He had spent his life creating AI to increase efficiency, drive profits, and push industries forward. But this was about something bigger than money. This was about changing lives. Daniel crossed his arms, watching Liam carefully. "We know Carter Innovations has been working on something similar. AI-driven education has been on your radar for a while." Liam nodded slowly. "Yes, but nothing we've designed that even comes close to this." He tapped the screen of the tablet Ethan had handed him earlier. "You're thinking about the individual student, not just the institution. This isn't just about numbers. It's about impact." Daniel and Ethan exchanged glances, for the first time seeing something they had never expected from the man who had been nothing more than a ghost in their lives. Genuine respect. Liam set the tablet down and looked at them both. "This is incredible work. Have you pitched it to investors?" Daniel let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Who do you think is going to back two guys with no tech background and a budget held together by grants and leftover scholarship money?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "We tried, we met with a few people. They all said the same thing. We don't fit the mold. We don't have the right degrees, the right company history. They don't care that we know the problem inside and out." Daniel clenched his jaw. "They only care about profits, which is why we're not looking for funding anymore. We're looking for a partner who actually gives a damn." And just like that, the words hung in the air. A challenge, an invitation. Liam stared at his sons, his chest tightening with an emotion he had spent his entire life running from: pride. They were brilliant, not just in intelligence, but in heart. They had their mother's tenacity, her determination to make the world better, even when it didn't want to change. He had spent 25 years building an empire, and here were his sons trying to build a bridge. Slowly he exhaled, nodding once. "I'm in." Ethan blinked. "What?" Liam met his gaze directly. "I'm in," he repeated, his voice steady. "Not as an investor, not as Carter Innovations, as your father." Daniel's jaw tensed, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. This was the moment he had been waiting for, wasn't it? For Liam Carter to step up, to show up. But now that it was happening, it felt almost too much. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "You'd do that?" His voice was quieter now, laced with something raw. Liam nodded. "You're right. Investors won't see the value because they're looking at the wrong things. They see numbers. I see what this could do for kids like you used to be. Kids who need a chance." Daniel let out a slow breath, his arms still crossed, as if trying to keep himself from trusting too quickly. "So what does this mean exactly?" Liam straightened in his chair, his business instincts kicking in. But for the first time, they were aligned with something more than profit. "It means," Liam said, "we build this together, on your terms. No corporate strings, no hidden agendas. You keep control. I just help make sure the right people listen." Ethan's eyes burned, and he looked away for a moment, exhaling. Daniel, ever the skeptic, wasn't convinced yet. He had spent too many years resenting the idea of Liam Carter. Could he let that go so easily? Margaret, who had been silent up until now, stirred slightly, her voice soft but full of quiet certainty. "He means it. she murmured, opening her eyes. All three men turned toward her. She smiled weakly. Liam doesn't make promises lightly. And when he does, her gaze flickered to him, and for the first time in years, she saw the man she had once loved. He keeps them. Liam swallowed hard, nodding. I do. Daniel took a long, measured breath. This wasn't how he expected things to go. He had spent his entire life believing his father was an absent villain, a man too consumed with his own success to care about the family he never knew existed. But now he didn't know what to believe anymore. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his face before offering a small, hesitant smile. Well, he said, guess we just partnered with the biggest name in tech. Daniel smirked. Hope you're ready for late nights and a lot of coffee, Carter. Liam chuckled softly. For the first time in 25 years, the last name didn't feel like a burden. I wouldn't have it any other way, he said. And just like that, a bridge began to form. One built not of steel and circuits, but of something stronger. A family trying to find its way home. The lights of San Francisco glittered in the distance, casting a golden glow against the evening sky. The Augustine, once a place of confrontation and revelation, now stood as the setting for something entirely different. A new beginning. The Bennett Bridge Foundation was being launched tonight, not as a corporate venture, not as another tech firm's passion project, but as something deeply personal. A bridge between past mistakes and future hope. A bridge between a father and his sons. Liam Carter stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching the room fill with guests, each one gathered to celebrate the very thing he had spent his life unknowingly searching for. Purpose, family, redemption. 6 months ago, he had been alone. His life had been defined by billion-dollar deals, by innovation, by progress measured only in stocks and market dominance. But now everything had changed. At the front of the room, Daniel and Ethan stood side by side, speaking to guests, their energy electric. They had done the impossible, turned an idea into a movement, a dream into something tangible. Daniel, sharp-witted and eloquent, effortlessly navigated conversations with legal analysts, philanthropists, and government officials. Ethan, passionate and warm, explained the AI-driven platform to pediatric specialists and educators. Together, they were unstoppable. And Liam, for the first time in his life, he wasn't leading the room. He was standing beside the people who mattered most, watching them shine. His sons had built something extraordinary. And this time, he wasn't on the outside looking in. Margaret was there too, healthier than she had been in years, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Her battle wasn't over, but for the first time since her diagnosis, she wasn't fighting alone. Liam had made sure of that. He had used every resource at his disposal, every connection he had, to ensure she got the best care possible. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because she had given him the two greatest gifts of his life, Daniel and Ethan. A soft tap on his shoulder pulled him from his thoughts. You look like a man who's finally seeing the bigger picture, Margaret said, her voice light with amusement. Liam exhaled, a small smile tugging at his lips. I spent my whole life thinking I was building something important. He looked at her, his voice quieter now. Turns out I was missing the real legacy. Margaret's eyes softened. They are incredible, aren't they? He nodded, watching his son shake hands with an educational director from the state. I don't know how they turned out this good without me. Margaret smirked. I do. Liam laughed under his breath. I walked into that hospital 6 months ago thinking I had nothing to offer them, that I'd lost my chance before I ever knew I had one. He shook his head, glancing back toward his sons. But they let me stay. They let me try. Margaret reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Because they saw what I've always seen. Before Liam could respond, the sound of a microphone being tapped filled the room. The audience hushed, and Daniel stepped onto the small stage at the front of the hall, adjusting his tie. Good evening, everyone, he began, his voice steady, commanding. We are here tonight to officially launch something that is more than just an organization. The Bennett Bridge Foundation isn't about technology or data. It's about giving kids a chance when no one else will. Ethan stepped forward next, his voice filled with passion. We created this program because we know what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. We know what it's like to wonder if you'll ever get the same opportunities as everyone else. Daniel nodded, his voice softer now. And we also know that sometimes, The most unexpected second chances are the ones that change everything. Liam felt a lump rise in his throat as Daniel turned, gesturing toward him. "We couldn't have done this alone," Daniel said, his voice thick with something unspoken. "Forgiveness. 6 months ago, we didn't even know who our father was." He glanced at Ethan, then back at the audience. "Now we don't just know him, we're building a future with him." A hush fell over the room. The weight of those words settled deep into Liam's chest. Ethan smiled, stepping closer to the microphone. "Dad, can you come up here?" Dad. Liam had heard his name in boardrooms and conference calls and headlines. But this was the only title that had ever truly mattered. The room filled with applause as Liam stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding in a way it never had before. Not from nerves, but from something even rarer. Fulfillment. He took the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces before him, but his gaze quickly returned to the two young men standing beside him. "When I was younger," Liam said, his voice rough with emotion, "I thought success was about numbers, about what you built, about how far you could push the world forward." He glanced at Daniel and Ethan, his sons. "But it turns out the greatest success of all is the family you build along the way." A pause, a breath, and then, in the quietest moment of the night, Liam Carter looked at his sons, two men who had grown up believing they had no father. "I'm so proud of you," he said. Daniel blinked, looking away briefly, his jaw tightening. Ethan's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Neither of them had expected those words to mean so much. But they did. They meant everything. Margaret, standing at the side of the stage, wiped at the corners of her eyes. And as Liam turned back to the audience, he knew this was just the beginning. Because family wasn't about time lost. It was about the time you chose to fight for. And tonight, they were all finally home. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the sounds of the city, horns blaring in the distance, laughter spilling out from late-night diners, the soft hum of life continuing in an endless cycle. But inside the elegant halls of the Augustine, something had shifted. This wasn't just another corporate event, another charity gala designed to impress investors and philanthropists. This was the beginning of something real, something meaningful, something lasting. Liam Carter stood at the edge of the stage, the applause still ringing in his ears, his heart still hammering in his chest. For the first time in decades, it wasn't a deal closing or a product launching that had him breathless. It was the sheer, overwhelming realization that he wasn't alone anymore. His eyes flickered to his sons, Daniel and Ethan, standing beside him, no longer strangers, but family. For 25 years, he had been missing the most important part of his life and hadn't even known it. Every business milestone, every award, every financial success, it had all been hollow without them, without knowing them, without watching them grow, without being a part of their lives. Tonight had changed everything. Not just for him, but for them. For the first time, they weren't just living parallel lives. They were standing on the same path, walking forward together. Margaret stood at the edge of the crowd, a gentle smile on her lips, her eyes filled with quiet pride and knowing. She had always believed this moment would come. Even when it had seemed impossible, she had held on to the hope that one day the lines of their lives would intersect. And now they had. Liam took a deep breath, stepping forward to the microphone, the entire room watching him. This time, he didn't feel the need to impress anyone. He didn't care about the cameras, the investors, or the elite members of San Francisco society. This moment was for them, for his family. "When I was younger," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "I thought success was measured in numbers, in deals, in how much you could build, how much you could achieve, how far you could push the world forward." He glanced at Daniel and Ethan. "I spent my life chasing that version of success, convinced that it would make me whole." He exhaled slowly, letting the truth settle over him. But it didn't. The room was silent now, hanging on to every word. Liam looked out at the sea of faces before him, then back to the two men standing beside him. "It took me 25 years to realize that the greatest achievement of my life wasn't a company, or an invention, or the money in my bank account." His voice softened. It was them. Daniel and Ethan exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable, but the emotion was there, deep and undeniable. I almost lost the most important thing in the world before I even knew I had it, Liam continued, his grip tightening around the microphone. And that's the hardest part about life. We don't always see what truly matters until we're on the verge of losing it. A few heads in the audience nodded. People understood this. They had lost things too. Time, love, people. Liam swallowed hard, his gaze flickering to Margaret. Sometimes we tell ourselves we're doing the right thing, that our sacrifices are for the best, that we're choosing the right path. His throat burned. But what if we're not? What if in trying so hard to succeed, we leave behind the very people who would make that success meaningful? He paused, letting the weight of his own mistakes settle over him. I can't change the past, he admitted. I can't go back and be there for their first steps, or their birthdays, or the nights when they needed me and didn't even know who I was. A silence stretched between them. Ethan looked down. Daniel blinked quickly, clearing his throat. But I can be here now. Liam turned to them, his voice steady, but his eyes full of something raw and real. If you'll let me. The invitation hung in the air, open-ended. For a long moment, Daniel and Ethan just stared at him. Then slowly, almost cautiously, Ethan nodded. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair before finally meeting his father's gaze. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A bridge was forming. Not perfect, not without its cracks, but it was there. And that was enough. Margaret smiled, tears shining in her eyes. The audience erupted into applause, but Liam barely heard it. The only thing that mattered was what had just happened between him and his sons. The past wasn't erased, but the future, that was theirs to build. This story isn't just about a billionaire finding his long-lost sons. It's about something far deeper, something we all need to remember. We live in a world where success is often defined by money, status, and power. But at the end of the day, when you strip all of that away, what are you left with? The people who matter. The ones who love you, the ones you love. Because money can be earned again. Businesses can be rebuilt. Careers can be restarted. But time? Time is the one thing you never get back. Liam Carter learned this the hard way. He spent 25 years thinking he had everything, only to realize he had been missing the most important thing of all. And maybe you're reading this right now, feeling the same ache in your chest. Maybe there's someone in your life you've lost touch with, a parent, a sibling, a friend, someone you let slip away while chasing success or trying to protect them, or because you thought you had more time. If this story teaches anything, it's this: don't wait until it's too late. Reach out, mend the bridge, because no achievement in the world will ever fill the space of the people you love. Liam, Daniel, and Ethan took the first step tonight. Comment below. Who in your life do you want to reconnect with? What's one thing this story has taught you? Like this if you believe in second chances. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about love, redemption, and the unexpected ways life can change us. This isn't just a story, it's a lesson. And maybe, just maybe, it's the sign you were waiting for. Go build your bridge today.